Most people in the UK have no idea where their pension is actually invested. Yet it could be the difference between retiring early and struggling through retirement. Today, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do to make sure that your pension is working just as hard as you are. A pension is a tax-efficient savings pot that's built over time, but it has strict rules on when you can access it. Now, there are three types of pensions: a state pension, a workplace pension, and a SIPP. Now, first is to work out which ones you have. The state pension uses the triple lock system, rising by whatever is higher. That's inflation, wages, or 2.5%. As of April 2025, the state pension is £921 a month. But the state pension isn't means tested. And with people living longer, it's becoming less sustainable as time goes on. Now, the truth is, me and you probably can't rely on the state pension. When we get to state pension age, realistically, it's probably not going to exist in its current form. In October of 2012, the government introduced the workplace pension. The idea was to allow for individuals to take more control of their finances for their retirement. Fast forward to 2025, the minimum contribution rate for a workplace pension is 8%. Now, if you're employed, you're likely enrolled on the workplace pension. That means, for example, you will pay 4% and your employer will pay 4%, reaching the 8% minimum. However, what you need to do is find out how much your employer will match up to. What I mean by this is your employer will match up to a certain percentage, and that depends company to company. For example, the company I work with match up to 10%. So an employee will put 10% in and the company will put 10% in, meaning that you get 20% of your annual salary into your pension pot. Now, the beauty of this is that you're not actually paying 10%. You're more likely paying 8% because of the tax relief that you receive on top. Now, on screen, you're going to see two different pensions. One where you put in the minimum 8% and one where you put 20%. Now, over a 30-year period, you can see that they're astronomically different. Now, this is taking into consideration that there's no interest on top of this. This is purely matched contributions. Next is to use an income tax calculator to work out how much it will actually cost you to max your pension contributions. And I'll link one in the description. This is a really good exercise if you want to work out if you were going to pay 10% and your employer was to match it, and how much at the end of the month or end of the year you'd have. I highly recommend going through this and having a play around in your own time. What I also want you to do is go and speak to your HR department. Go and speak to your HR department and ask them what are the max contributions that the employer will match up to. Now, some companies might only match up to 8%. Some companies might match up to 15%. It depends on which company you work for, and they're all different. However, it's advantageous to do the maximum contributions if you can afford it. Next is fund choice. Now, this is a big one. Most of the UK don't actually know where their pensions are stored. If I asked you now, what is your pension invested in? Most of you probably wouldn't be able to answer. Now, your workplace pension will invest into default funds. And these default funds, depending on your age. As you're younger, the default fund will be slightly riskier. And as you progress through your working life, the default fund becomes less volatile. Now, this is done to ensure that you have a retirement fund that is protected from massive swings in the stock market. However, default funds aren't normally the best. Now, from my own personal experience, I changed my default fund into an S&P 500 tracker. Now, you need to be aware that these products can go up and down, but if you're investing for the long term and it's aligned with your goals, it might just be best to change the default fund. So what you need to do is you need to log into your account, look at what fund you're in, what are the fees, and if they're aligned with your long-term goals. If you find out that they're not aligned with your goals, it might be time to switch. Self-invested personal pension. Once you've sorted your workplace pension, you can start looking at what's called a SIPP. Think of a SIPP as a DIY pension. You get to choose where that pension's invested, how much you put in. However, the key thing to remember is that your employer will not match contributions. One of the major benefits of a SIPP, just like your workplace pension, is you can take out that money between age 55 and 57. Now, it depends on when you're going to retire, but at the moment it's up to 57 years old. Now, if you're already maxing out your workplace pensions and you want to put more into your long-term pension plan, a SIPP is a great way to maximize those contributions. Now, a benefit of SIPPs is that a workplace pension can become a SIPP. What I mean by this is, if you have worked for an employer and paid into your workplace pension, and you then subsequently leave that employer, you can transfer that pension pot into your own SIPP. Now, it takes a little while, up to 12 weeks, but you can have full autonomy and control over that money. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go and leave your employer just to have control over your pension, but if you've got old pensions that are sat there in a default fund and you want the ability to play around and invest for your future, I would recommend looking at putting it into your SIPP. Compound growth and why you should start now. Let's say you earn £30,000 and you contribute 10% of your salary, which is also matched by your employer. So 20% of your salary, or £6,000 a year, is going into an S&P tracker at roughly around 11%. As you can see on screen, in 30 years, you could have in the region of £1.7 million. But what if you haven't got 30 years? Well, looking at the chart, you can see that even if you started late and you contributed 10% of £30,000 over an 8-year period, your contributions could add up to over £75,000. Now, if you're slightly older and you don't have 30 years in to invest, still start now. As we've seen on screen, 8 years could make you £75,000 at a return of 11%. Now, the wealthiest 10% of individuals in the UK have 36% of their net worth in pensions. It's a tool that's used by the rich to get richer, to plan for their financial future. I can tell you now that they're not leaving it in a default fund and letting somebody else manage their money. They've got full control, they know where their money is, and they know what fund it's in. So what should you do today? Well, the first thing is to check your pension contributions. Is it the minimum 8% that you and your employer are paying, or can you pay more? If you're unsure, speak to your HR. Ask them about max matching. Next is log into your pension portal and have a look at the fund you're in. If you're not sure, again, speak to your HR, they'll be able to give you the logins. After you've done those, use an income tax calculator and work out the real cost of upping your pension. I can guarantee you that it will be less than you think. Once you've done all these, and if you're confident, start exploring a SIPP. If you can, use old pension funds and put them into a SIPP to give you more autonomy. Start paying into a SIPP and have tax relief on top of that. The last bit of advice is start today. As we know, the state pension isn't going to sustain us over the long term. I don't know about you, but I can't live off £921 a month. So what makes me think in 35 years' time, I'm going to be able to live on that? The answer is that we're not. If you start planning for your financial future today, you'll thank yourself when you come to retire, whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 40 years.